Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and start, and just so everyone knows, this is being recorded so it can be sent out for later use for teachers and everything. So first off, I just want to thank everyone for coming, and especially the speakers for participating in this event. We couldn't do it without you guys, so thank you. And welcome to the Careers in Science webinar. While we wait on everyone to finish joining the meeting, I'm going to mention a few people who helped put this together. Ben, Kaylee, and Tom all assisted with recruiting and coordination of this special event, and thank you guys. I also just want to mention the organizations involved in this event. So Volunteer West Virginia, AFNHA, AmeriCorps, and the Comp Discovery Center all assisted with recruiting in this event. We are all AmeriCorps members with the AFNHA, or Appalachian Forest National Heritage Area, and we are all at the beginning stages of our careers in science. AmeriCorps is a great organization that offers different opportunities for members to serve their communities and gain life and career experience. Some of us work with the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and also with local organizations like the Green Bank Observatory, Canaan Valley Wildlife Refuge, and the Seneca Rocks Discovery Center. Again, thank you so much to all the speakers we have here today, and thank you to the Comp Discovery Center for helping to spread the word about this event. We have a diverse group of professionals here to speak. First, I just want to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get to the juicy information. Quickly, I just want to remind everybody to please mute your microphone and turn off your camera if you're not an active speaker, so that we can save bandwidth and prevent any accidental interruptions. If you have a question for a speaker, please put it in the chat, and we will have it answered during the Q&A portion at the end of each speaker's talk. We won't respond to raised hands so that we don't interrupt the speaker. Feel free to interact in the chat and post questions at any time. When the speaker has 2 minutes left, you'll hear a sound, and this is that sound. This is just to let you know that you have 2 minutes left and to begin wrapping up your presentation. We will then bring any questions forward for the speaker to answer. If you happen to be a teacher showing this webinar to your students in a classroom, could you please put the number of students present in your classroom in the chat so I keep track of that. All right, so now on to presentation. So careers in science covers such a large number of jobs, and anyone can have these jobs. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, but these subjects can be further broken down into earth and physical sciences, life sciences, engineering, mathematics, computer science, and health. There are so many different jobs available in each of these categories. Here's a general summary, but this is just a small number of the jobs that we can get in STEM. There are so many different careers with a variety of perspectives available, and all of them can be enjoyable. Research, policy, education, innovation, and leaders are all words that can describe aspects of a career in science. They can all be very rewarding and engaging. So now on to our wonderful speakers so we can learn more specifically about certain careers in science. First, speaking is Chad Landress with the U.S. Forest Service. Take it away, Chad.
Thanks, Tiffany. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It's good to see some familiar names in the participant list too. So thanks to everybody else, a lot of colleagues that are helping out. And you know, one thing that really struck me when that slide you had, Sydney, that had all the different career paths in science, technology, engineering, and math, is I did a quick count while the slide was up, and there's about 20 of those that, as a fisheries biologist, I work with those other careers that are STEM careers on a regular basis, almost daily basis. So the overlap with these types of careers is really, really important. And it's also important to consider when you're looking at potential career paths, because a lot of folks think, oh, you're a fish biologist, you go outside and catch fish all day or something of that sort. And maybe at some points in your career, that is what it entails. And even on a good day, a lucky day now, I still get to do that. But there's a lot more complexity to it, and a lot more variability than just going out and handling fish or looking at fish and fish habitat. So a little bit about me, just if that may benefit potential folks that might be interested in this type of career. So I've always been interested in nature and being outside. So, once I learned that, kind of had a similar experience to this, where all it took was somebody telling me that you could actually get paid to be a fish biologist or to be outside in conservation. And so I was, started to pursue that career path. I, did some volunteer work in high school to get out with other professionals. So anytime you have an opportunity to do that, it's never too early to start. And that's going to be one of the most important things you can do, is to get field experience, and especially in any type of conservation work, whether it's fish biology, wildlife biology, and other outdoor conservation work. I did my formal college education. I got a bachelor's degree in aquatic ecology, and then worked some seasonal positions that I'll talk a little bit more about in a second for a while, and then got a master's degree in fisheries and natural resource management. So I've got a focus on aquatic and fisheries, but also kind of some broad natural resource management that tends to lend itself well to working for the Forest Service. So currently I'm the fish biologist for the Monongahela National Forest, but I've also worked for state agencies, DNR, worked for Fish and Wildlife Service, and I know we have speakers from some of these other agencies, so I won't expand on that. But what I will say is that being a fish biologist for different agencies means different things. And it's really important as you go down a career path to kind of figure out where your niche is and where your interests are. Because as a Forest Service employee, my primary focus is looking at the habitat and the landscape and the watersheds first and foremost, and how those affect fish populations and how those affect fish habitat. The photo here in the intro slide is I've got the backpack on. That's a backpack electrofishing unit that we use to sample for fish, and this is actually a University of Kentucky class that we took out to give them a demonstration of fisheries techniques. All right, next slide. So while I do get to go and actually sample fish some of the time, most of my work is actually centered around the habitat and the environment that affects the fishery. And I'll show you a few examples of the types of projects that we work on, and that me as a fisheries biologist, I try to lead these types of projects on the National Forest. And what's really interesting about being a fish biologist for the National Forest is I get to coordinate with other disciplines. I get to work with engineers, I get to work with wildlife biologists and other specialists, botanists, ecologists, and we get to integrate these ideas into projects on the ground. And it really is when you look at these projects that we're looking at here, it's not one person that's designing and bringing it from point A to point B or before and after. It takes a whole team. So just as learning the science is important, also being able to work with people, and bring people together as a team to accomplish a common goal is just as important to being a successful fish biologist or conservationist. So I want to go through a few examples of the types of projects that we have been working on recently on the Monongahela National Forest, and these types of projects are applicable to a lot of different places across the country, and there's a lot of different jobs that are associated with this. Maybe you don't like fish, but you like engineering, so you can help fish out by helping us design these stream crossings. So this example, the before photos on the left, the after photos on the right, and we basically had a road crossing a stream with an undersized pipe in place, and you can see that it's got what we call a perch, so there's a jump for fish to be able to swim through that pipe. And fish, just like us, like to move around and go places, and take better opportunities for feeding and reproduction. And pretty much the pipe on the left is essentially the COVID situation. You can't go anywhere and do anything, so they're kind of stuck there, and they can't make it upstream to migrate and reproduce. So what we did was design a better structure on the right that allows for the stream to behave naturally. We call it stream simulation. It requires going out with a lot of technical skills and taking three-dimensional topographic surveys of the stream up and down, of the road up and down, and coming up with a design using computer software programs, AutoCAD, computer-aided drafting, and then actually implementing the project, which is the fun part, but there's a lot of work that goes into the pre-work to get us to that point. This is just one example of how it takes multiple types of science to get one thing in place for what seems like a fish focus. All right, next. All right, this is our stream habitat enhancement, our large woody material, and this is probably one of the actions that we do, one of the restoration actions that we do that garners the most interest from the public, because one, we get to use these crazy machines. The machine on the top photo is called a spider excavator because it can actually walk, so we can actually avoid sensitive areas when we're working up and down a stream. We also use backhoes and excavators and other heavy equipment. So again, as a fish biologist, the first thing you may not think about is heavy equipment, but to get some of this habitat restoration work that we do in place sometimes requires these tools, and it's really, really fun work. Again, a lot of planning, a lot of coordination with other people to get to this point. We do what's called hydraulic analysis to determine what types of structures we're going to put in the stream, and there's, again, a lot of design work that goes into these. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do here in this instance is to reintroduce large pieces of wood back into these streams where it naturally would have been found, which provides cover and habitat for fish, and helps protect stream banks and reduces erosion and sedimentation. So all these things are good for the fish population. All right, next. Okay, next is riparian restoration. So this can be as simple as planting trees, and we work with partners like Trout Unlimited and other partners out there to implement this work. It's pretty low tech, but this is, it offers us opportunities to bring people in, seasonal positions. These are summer jobs, typically folks that are just out of high school or in between semesters in college. They can work their summer semester with us, and we go out and we plant sometimes thousands of trees along stream banks to help improve stream shade, to keep the trout streams colder, stabilize the banks. So pretty self-explanatory there. Next. And then kind of a final one for a restoration activity. The last thing you may think about with being a fish biologist and thinking about how to protect fisheries resources are roads and being up on the mountaintops. And in this instance, what we have here is this restoration is called road decommissioning. And the top left photo shows where there's a big erosion point on the bank. And the top right photo is us actually doing the process of decommissioning, which is decompacting and recontouring the road surface to allow water to infiltrate. And then the bottom photo shows the same road after a year or two. So it's, regrowing vegetation. There's no longer that sediment and erosion making its way down the road into the streams affecting those fish populations. So, this would be a recommendation as a fish biologist that we would give, but it requires working with our road engineers and other resources to actually come to a conclusion as to what the project's going to look like on the ground. Next. All right, so I gave you 4 examples of what restoration as a National Forest fish biologist may look like. And this is kind of our so what. This is what we're trying to protect. We got an example of an endangered fish on the top. This is the candy darter. And then we have our native brook trout on the bottom photo. And ultimately, both these species require clean water, low sediment loads. So we're really trying to protect the landscape to protect these fish, other aquatic organisms like crayfish and mussels, etc. So we also do monitoring, as well as our partners with the DNR, Fish and Wildlife Service, Trout Unlimited, others that do monitoring of these populations directly, going out and collecting data, habitat data, fish population data to determine the health of these fish and their populations. And that's how we determine if we're successful in our management type. So I'll cut it off there, Sydney, for at a good stopping point.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. Are there any questions anyone has for the Q&A before we move on to our next speaker? Yeah, I don't think there are any questions coming up in the chat either. So you did a good job covering it, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
All righty. Up next, we have Bryce Calton, who's a Senior Technology Manager with Verizon Wireless.
Hello, everybody. I'll probably turn my video off here in just a second, just to give full screen to the slides. But Bryce Calton, thanks for inviting me to participate in this. And lately, I've been spending a lot more time helping people get into the career of information technology and things like that. So I really enjoy these things. A little bit about me to start. I don't know if I turn my camera off. I've been in technology for quite a long time, so there must be something I like about it. Otherwise, I would have changed my scene. And hopefully other people can find things they like about it too. I followed a not quite traditional, I didn't go to the traditional 4 years of college to get into information technology. And I'd say when I first broke into becoming an adult and finding a career, it was a little easier to do non-traditional routes. So I remember a time when my mom was asked, I didn't know what I wanted to do out of high school yet. And my mom was asking me to do some things around the house that involved electronics and technology, and I never complained when she asked me to do that. So I had the aha moment, like, I must like this stuff. So I signed up for a technical college, and that got me into my first career job, which was at a small place, and then slowly but surely moved around and landed in Verizon. It was GT before that, which some of the benefit there of working in a large corporation like that is I completed college while I was working there, and they helped with tuition assistance and made my way through, finally got a bachelor's, finally got my master's in business. So, there are other paths than just 4 years of college. And over that career, I've done lots of different things, except I haven't exactly written software myself. The last many years I've been managing people and working with teams that do that, but I just haven't done it myself, but I've done plenty of other things. If anybody wants to ask any questions, I probably can help. Currently I'm working on, emerging tech projects, having to do with artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented reality, biometrics, blockchain. we're trying to apply those emerging technologies to business problems through experimentation, see what we can come up with next. So what have I learned about this career path over that career of mine? If you're bored in IT, then change what you're doing. I mean, it's pretty easy. There's so many different things you can do. You shouldn't be bored, so just learn the next thing and work towards working on that. I would say it's pretty easy to start a career in technology, though it may not feel that way when you're first learning about it. The reason is there's lots of resources out there, and the community of IT people is usually pretty helpful with wanting to help the next person out. Hard and smart work pays off. If you become, if you master some of these technologies, it can lead to some pretty good pay and benefits over, the course of your career. And right now for me, working on brand new technology is pretty fun. So next slide, Sid. In my opinion, why is STEM important? Echoing what Chad mentioned earlier, I loved hearing that, because you wouldn't think there's much in common with what I do and what he does, but I will agree that most every job these days requires knowledge of STEM. So learn your STEM and you'll be pretty well, prepared for whatever job career you want. I would say, if you do want a job in sales or HR or one of those, I would call it non-STEM roles, those people have to work with STEM people quite a bit. I mean, if you're in, for instance, in Verizon, we've got, lawyers that are assigned to IT, and they help us make sure that we're treating data right and, not exporting things to other countries and all that kind of thing. HR has to build tools, so everybody has to talk to IT people and STEM people. The more you know about it, the more you can have a good conversation with them. The next things, the more you put into STEM, I would say the better you are at your job. So, you come to a point where instead of asking people, can I work for you or can I get this job? They start asking you, hey, will you come work for me? And I want you to help me out with this. So that's a good feeling to have. Jobs in STEM need more diversity. The best solutions to problems are ones that are figured out by a team of people from all walks of life, from diverse backgrounds. It just makes for better solutions. STEM fields, jobs in STEM fields are growing faster than your average job, so there's lots of opportunity out there. And then I'm rooting for the home team. I want all of our US students to become great in STEM and continue to lead the world in technology and innovation, and that just leads to great quality of life here. So next. So these next 3 slides are sort of ordered in a progression, like how do I get started and then where does it go from there? Some entry level paths you can take. This isn't a comprehensive list, but to get started, you can start in some of these roles here, tech support, where you're helping people with problems with their computers, devices, their software. To do that, you need people skills. You need to be able to step through troubleshooting, try this, it didn't work, try the next. And you have to be ahead of the people you're helping in your knowledge of that technology. So that's a typical kind of just a roundabout technical support description. Web development's another entry level where you're simply creating basic web pages. You're basically putting text, data, pictures, and controls together to deliver a web page by using basic languages. And these days you don't even have to know the languages. You can they've got build it, DIY tools that you can use to build your own website. Other skills, art and design skills are good, and knowledge that your users are who you're building this for. You can also get in by building and maintaining small networks, for people, residential or small business, and with that you're more hands-on. You're learning TCP/IP and radio waves and stuff like that. Okay, next slide, Sid. So where do you go from there? You can get into more intermediate level roles like systems administration. Each one of these things I have listed here can be a career in itself, or you can become a jack of all trades where you have knowledge of all of these things. You know, network, data, server, security. At this point, you know about the systems, about the individual servers and things that make up the system, how they interconnect, how they serve the users. Or you know, another possible path is to stay on the software coding and do what we call full stack application development, where you're not just building the front end, you're also building the system, the part of the app that interconnects it to other applications and its back end. And then you also know about the back end, which is typically data and data management. Similar type of skill set there with web design. Now on to the advanced level. You know, what do you do whenever you've come a long way and you know a lot? You can get into the data sciences, basically complex, you know, algorithms and math, and forcing it through computers to do it faster. That's where your AI, your augmented reality and virtual reality, machine learning, all that exists in this area. You can do new technology research, you know, get involved with the bleeding edge technologies and how people can use them, or you can get into, you know, taking care of this system for the whole company, the whole enterprise. And with that, it's interesting, you know, it always has to be up. The business always has to be running. So with that, you're learning about life cycle management. How do I deploy the new stuff and decommission the old stuff while keeping the business running and the users don't notice a thing going on in the background? So next slide. What are the takeaways in terms of STEM? You know, I would say feed your curiosity, you know, be reading, studying, watching videos, just stay curious and keep learning. I also say explore by doing. You know, sometimes put the book down, turn the computer off and go do something, you know, build something in the garage, take something apart. It's easy in this field to feel overwhelmed by how much you need to know. There's so much to learn. Don't let yourself get overwhelmed. Just learn the next thing. That'll lead to the next thing, and then you'll look back and suddenly you know all these things. Take time every once in a while to think about when you're doing stuff, when you're learning stuff, what do you like spending time on, but also what do you not like spending time on? That helps you guide your own career to work on things that you enjoy. Mentorship is important. Every job I've had is because I knew somebody, or you know, they helped me out get to that next spot. Remember the acronym PI: performance, aka do good work, image, be a good person, you know, let people know that you're a good person by doing good things and saying the right things. And exposure, make sure people know who you are and what you do and things like that. And then you've got to, you know, drive to achieve your dreams. The game's not going to come to you. So put in the time and effort to get there. Last slide. Sid, next slide. I'm not seeing it. So where can I learn more about information technology specifically? Find mentors in your life. They'll help you out. General career questions. There's one website where you can go and ask professionals of a number of different careers, just basic questions about that career, and they'll answer back. There's some coding resources. Those are free, geared a little bit for beginners. There are, you know, things for more experienced developers out there. If you're more interested in the technology side, like networking equipment, Cisco has some stuff out there. Storage and servers, you know, Dell, cybersecurity, and Linux is about operating systems and the code that runs the devices. And then always, you know, if you're interested, take the electives that your school offers. And that's all from me.
Alrighty, thank you so very much. That was nice and comprehensive. Are there any Q&As available in the chat? Or if anybody wants to speak up to ask a question, feel free.
You got one question in the chat.
Okay.
The
Can you read
pace.
that out?
I'll read it real quick. I see it. The private industry can be a little more faster paced than some STEM jobs. Have you liked that you're quick paced, and have you kept some balance? That is a insightful question. There are some times in especially in information technology that there's pressure to keep the system up, to move on to the next feature. There's a lot of work these days, a lot of thought leadership around, how do you, agile. Everybody's probably, I don't know, maybe not everybody. People have heard the word agile. Agile development means a lot of, don't make it too big. Just do little things, make it iteratively better. There can be some pressure in the private side that working at a big company is about making money, revenue, and keeping service to the customers. So yes, it can be more pressure packed in IT in a big company.
Alrighty, thank you so much. And if that's all our questions, we'll go ahead and move on to the next speaker. That is Brianna Gibson, who is a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service. Are you there, Brianna?
I don't see her in the participant list.
All right. She may not have made it then. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and skip her then, and then if she ends up coming in at the end, we'll let her speak. So hopefully, Alicia, are you okay with going ahead?
Yes, that's no problem. Let me just turn my camera on.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for having me. This has actually been super interesting for me to hear too, because I don't really overlap very much with any of the speakers so far, so it's been really interesting. My name is Alicia Wasula. I own Shade Tree Meteorology, so I am a meteorologist. I work in what can be probably described as a pretty small niche area known as forensic meteorology. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what that is as we're going through here, and a little bit about how I got to where I am, which is kind of a non-traditional path as well. I know it's been talked about by previous speakers. So what does a forensic meteorologist do? Well, the majority of what we do involves research and report writing for legal purposes. So like if there's a lawsuit, which could be, any type of lawsuit, but a lot of personal injury, property claims, those kinds of things where the weather played a role. The attorneys will get involved in their case and realize that they may not know everything that they need to know about how to interpret the weather record. And it's interesting in meteorology because the weather data is actually free and it's archived by the government. So anybody can go in and get the weather data that they need for a specific case, but then interpreting it and really doing a full analysis of what happened, looking at radar to see if there's precipitation going on, and those kinds of things are where we would get brought on. So this is a really interesting area of meteorology. It's outside of forecasting. I don't do anything with forecasting. So that's one reason that I ended up here. I actually got into meteorology because I was always interested in the weather, which is kind of the story of a lot of us who work in this field. I always like science. I really like the weather. And I figured out pretty early on that I wasn't very good at forecasting. I didn't really enjoy it, although I love the science of it and looking back at past weather events and learning what happened. So that's where my real skill was and what I really enjoy doing today about my job. I also realized that if you're going to work for the government, you need to be able to work shifts. And that's part of a lot of different meteorology jobs, especially if you're doing forecasting. The weather goes on 24/7. And so, media meteorologists who work for TV stations, government meteorologists who work for the Weather Service, they'll also be working rotating shifts or at least some kind of shift work. And that's very difficult. And, if you know you're going to be doing that early on and it doesn't bother you, then that's great. But a lot of people get into those kinds of jobs and kind of realized that it's a lot harder. So I was really fortunate to do an internship, actually a lot of internships. I interned with a local forensic meteorologist who's doing, he was at the time doing what I do today. So that was neat. I also had an internship with the local office of the National Weather Service. So I got to see that government branch of meteorology. And, you know, so basically I always tell students that if there are any internship opportunities that arise, even if it's something you don't know if you really want to do, I would take them. A lot of the connections that I made through my student internships as an undergraduate really led me to the path that I am today. I mentioned that I had an internship with a local forensic meteorologist. At the time I did the internship, I really didn't think I wanted to do this kind of work, but coming back to it, I actually really, really love it. So it's kind of a neat full circle experience. When I was at the National Weather Service, I met the former owner of this company. He, at the time, was a government meteorologist. He retired and started the company that was Shade Tree Meteorology back in 2004. So I have kind of, like I said, a non-traditional career path. I had a family fairly young. I was in graduate school when I had my daughter. And so I spent about 5 years when my kids were young doing a lot of teaching. So I did adjunct teaching pretty much anywhere I could. I taught upper level classes in meteorology. I taught gen ed classes. Up until last spring, I actually had continued to teach through today. I really enjoy engaging with students. And you know, I actually found that community colleges were a neat place to meet a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, and they would come and take the weather class because they thought it sounded cool. So I really enjoyed that. And then as my kids got bigger, I started looking for some different types of work, and I reconnected with the owner of this company who was kind of looking for some help at the time. And that's how I ended up here. I worked with him for about 3 years. And then as he retired, I was actually able to purchase the business from him. And today you can see the picture up there. I have one employee of my own. She's actually remote in Alabama. I'm based in upstate New York. So I'm actually not even in the same state as you guys today. But there's meteorologists who do what I do all over the country. And a lot of us do have our own businesses. So having the opportunity to have a business and own it has been something that I never thought that I would do. And I really, really, really am so glad to have had the opportunity, and I love it. It gives me a lot of flexibility. It's a lot of hard work, but it's definitely a lot of fun too. So you want to go to the next slide? So I mentioned that we a lot of times work for attorneys. We're retained by the attorneys, although the people or the entities in the lawsuits could be anything from insurance companies to single, individuals. It really could be anything. And what's interesting about this work is that it tends to be kind of geographical. So it's okay. You can even go to the next one. So I work in the Northeast United States, but I take cases from all over the country. And you can see on the left there is a little pie chart that shows different types of legal cases. On the right is a pie chart that shows different types of weather. So what's interesting is that the vast majority of the cases that we take, even though I have a colleague in Alabama, are slip and falls on ice. And that's just because the history of this company is that it was started in the Northeast. And so lawyers like people who are local in case you have to travel to a trial and those kinds of things. So you tend to get a lot of regional expertise. And the number of slip and fall cases we deal with vastly outnumbers everything else. But we do take all different types of cases. So I have a case right now, two actually, that are dealing with flooding. There's usually municipalities involved, those kinds of things. It might be motor vehicle accidents. We've had some of those cases recently as well. So even though it's heavily weighted towards one type of weather event, every single case is different. So we find that even cases for the same storm, the weather might have unraveled a little bit differently depending on where the incident happened, if it was in Boston or if it was in New York City, and the laws are different everywhere. So communication is super important in this field. You have to be able to take your science, which has to be super, sound, and you have to use good practices, because if you go to court, you have to say that you use the right practices and methods. But you have to be able to explain it. So my teaching background actually has helped with that. So it's really a neat application of taking science and explaining it to people who are not scientists. So that could be lawyers, it could be a jury. you never know. So I really enjoy doing that. And I think that's something that maybe I didn't realize when I was doing the internship back then. I thought, that it was a lot of science, and I didn't actually learn about the application part and taking it to people who are not scientists until a little bit later on. But it's actually one of the things I really love about what I do. You can go to the next slide. So day-to-day duties, this is hilarious because I look at this list and like it may be all of these, it may be none of these. One of the things about being a business owner is that no day is typical. And I'm sure this is true if you work in other private industry where it's a bigger company or even in the government, but particularly for entrepreneurs, you have to be willing to kind of be flexible, and you have to be pretty organized in terms of knowing what needs to get done and triaging sort of the really big important deadlines. Right now, I'm juggling about 2 or 3 very large size projects that we need to do research for. They're all going to have deadlines in the spring. And then a bunch of smaller projects that don't really have deadlines, but they kind of do because lawyers don't have a deadline until they actually have a deadline, and then it's tomorrow. So that can be a little bit challenging. One of the things we also like to do are talks like this, talking to schools. I miss going in person. That was really one of my favorite things, was to talk to students of all ages, because, this little area of meteorology is something that I didn't know existed. And there's probably a lot of other jobs like that where, you don't know that they exist unless you actually meet somebody who's doing that job. So getting out and talking about what we do is really one of our favorite things. Both myself and my employee really enjoy that part of the work. Being a business owner, there's also like administrative tasks. I have a bookkeeper, but I have to work with her on things. I have to do scheduling. I have to plan workload for myself and my employee. There's just a lot of different things that have to be done, and it's a really neat place to be. Like I mentioned, owning your own business is something that's very, it's really empowering. You feel like you're in charge, but then sometimes you can get really bogged down in the day-to-day things that have to get done too. So there's kind of a balance there. I've always worked at home with this job, which is another thing that has really worked well for my family. I have 2 kids who are 15 and 12. And even as they've gotten older, I've really enjoyed that. But it's definitely something where you would want to learn to set boundaries too. Like I have to close the door to my office and I don't go on my computer unless I need to on the weekends. It's really, I'm sure everybody's learned this now because we're all sort of working at home in some capacity. And so, you have to just be able to set those boundaries. Otherwise, you're just on all the time, and that can be very draining. And I've gotten into that pattern. So that's kind of something that I've learned. So I think that's pretty much all I have about what I do, but I'm happy to take any questions if there's time. I hope I didn't go on too long.
No, you're good.
Okay.
Are there any questions in the chat? Or if anyone has any questions, they can speak up. But yes, that was very interesting. I did not know that this was a sector in meteorology, so it's super cool to learn about.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And if there's any follow-up questions or you think of something afterwards, feel free to reach out too.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for helping out and participating.
Absolutely. Glad to do it. Nice to meet you all.
Yes. All right, so next we have Drew Phipps, who's a mussel biologist with the White Sulphur Springs National Fish Hatchery.
Hi, how are y'all doing? I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Well, that's excellent. My name is Drew Phipps, and I work here at the White Sulphur Springs National Fish Hatchery down in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And I am the leader of the ARC unit here. We work mainly with endangered species and threatened species of freshwater mussels, endangered fish species like the candy darter, and we also work with the endangered and threatened crayfish species, the big sandy crayfish and the guyanot crayfish. Several of those are endemic to West Virginia, which means they only live, here and just over the Virginia border. and into Kentucky, they're pretty close. We deal with a lot of different mussel species that are native only to the southeast, and I have probably handled more endangered species of animals than most will ever see in their lifetime, of multiple fauna groups. I'll tell you a little bit about how I got into this. I started out, I am the son of a bunch of coal miners from Southwest Virginia, and I grew up on the Clinch River, which is probably the most diverse river in the eastern part of North America, and one of the more diverse rivers in the world. It has 46 species of freshwater mussel, somewhere around 200 species of fish. And I grew up playing and fishing in there, and was introduced to mussels through being out in the river, and that's kind of how I got started. Was hunting and fishing, and I went to college at Virginia Tech, and did a fishery science major there for my bachelor's, and ended up doing a master's degree there, studying freshwater mussels. And that's a little bit about me, but a little bit more about what we do here at the hatchery. Traditionally, fish hatcheries have been known for the production of game fish. Trout, for instance, is very popular among fish hatcheries. Warm water fish, largemouth bass, sunfish, and we do a lot of that here at the fish hatchery. In one portion of it, we produce rainbow trout for mitigation for portions of the West where the Army Corps of Engineers impacted trout streams. We produce somewhere around 20 million eggs, I think it is, a year, 20 million trout eggs a year, that are released and grown up and released into waters across the country, some here in West Virginia, and in other states as well. But what we mainly focus on up here on this end of the hatchery is endangered species work. And so what we do mainly is freshwater mussel work. There's about 300 species of freshwater mussel in North America. That's the most diverse fauna in the world, as far as we know. There's more species here in West Virginia, and Kentucky than there are in all of Europe. In some of our streams and rivers here close by, we have more species than whole continents have. And so most people have never encountered freshwater mussels. One of the biggest questions that I get is can you eat them? And my answer to that is always you can, but they taste pretty bad. And there's also quite a bit of regulation around them now in regards to harvesting them. But certainly the Native Americans used to eat and use the shell of the freshwater mussels, and up until recently, and still in some places, the shells are used for buttons and pearls. One of the largest industries in this country at one point was commercial shell harvest of freshwater mussels in the Mississippi River, where they would pull tons a day out, and all of your buttons on your shirts, on your pants, they were all made out of freshwater mussel shell at one point. Freshwater mussels also offer an incredible amount of free water cleaning, and so what we do is we try to grow those animals here in the laboratory to restore some of the populations that have been degraded by poor water quality, over harvest, whatever may be causing the animals to go into decline. We try to grow those animals and bolster their populations. We're doing that also with the Candy Darter. We're working with West Virginia DNR to both trap and transport those animals, and we're also trying to produce those animals to stock some out. And in that, we're also working with the crayfish, Big Sandy and Guyandotte crayfish, both of which are being heavily impacted by landscape changes down in the Guyandotte and Big Sandy drainage. We're working to grow those animals to put them back out. And you know, I think this job is probably one of the most complex that I've ever had, because we're working with multiple different species that all have their own challenges. You know, I think I would liken this to rocket science, but to be honest, I believe it's harder. There's more variables that are out of our control. You know, we rely a lot on Mother Nature, and that's kind of fickle way to go. And so, you know, for me, I think a lot of folks, when we started out in fishery science and fisheries biology, I wanted to go to school to bass fish or trout fish or learn how to. And a lot of the folks that started in school with me were the same way. And what we realized really quickly is we were going to have to use a lot of chemistry and biology and a lot of statistics suddenly got involved and cluttered the fishing up a whole lot. But it's really been a wonderful journey to be able to learn all of those things. And I would encourage anybody that enjoys the outdoors and enjoys, you know, doing things in the wild and especially in the water to look into fishery science. I think it's a very valuable profession, and we need more good folks in it. And it's definitely very difficult, but it's something that you can certainly do. And there's a lot of good programs out there. There's programs at Virginia Tech. There's programs at Tennessee. West Virginia University, of course, has a very fine program. And there's programs here and there that you can look into. And of course, we would be more than glad to answer any questions and try to assist you on learning about how to get into this field. And would love to have folks at the hatchery once things have subsided with COVID and the restrictions. We do a lot of work here that folks enjoy coming to see us spawn the trout, or when we're working with the mussels and the fish. And I think we're more than happy to do tours and have visitors. And hopefully things will return to sunshine and blue skies soon, and we can resume those things. And I'll just say that really it's been a rewarding career, and hopefully we can do a lot more over the next year or two to help a lot of these species that a lot of folks have never seen. And that's kind of all I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Are there any questions in the chat for Drew?
You do see one question here. Do you have to do a lot of traveling for your position to the various areas that you study, or do you do most of your work at the hatchery?
So in this position now, I spend a lot more time at the hatchery than I used to in some of my previous positions as a field biologist. You know, now a lot of the animals are brought here by West Virginia DNR and other agencies that we work with for us to work with, and our job is mainly contained within the hatchery, which is a big enough job in itself. We do some field surveys and monitoring. We're hoping to increase that. We do some field collection of animals, but I would say that it's probably 80-20. You know, 80% in the hatchery and 20% travel. You know, there's a lot of field mussel biologists who spend a lot of time on the road. consulting folks who do consulting mussel biology, they probably spend 80% of their time, traveling. And so there's quite a few things that can be done with endangered species that put you in different positions.
Awesome, thank you. And thank you so much for participating.
Thank y'all.
Alrighty, so next we have Will Armentrout, who's an astronomer scientist with the Green Bank Observatory.
Hello, thank you, Sydney, and thank you everyone for organizing this. If you are not familiar with the Green Bank Observatory, we are a National Science Foundation facility nestled deep in the mountains of West Virginia, just a little bit south of where Sydney is right now, in Bartow. And the observatory has been in existence since about 1957. So for some history of it, after World War II, a lot of the powers who had good radar technology after the war was over, they didn't need to use that to find ships and planes, and they refocused it into the new field of radio astronomy. And so Green Bank actually was the first national observatory. And the reason it's in West Virginia, as opposed to out in a desert somewhere, is because for radio astronomy, you don't need clear skies like you think of if you go outside with a telescope at night. You can have clouds. What you can't have in radio astronomy is any sort of radio interference. So if you're around Bartow or Green Bank, you'll notice you don't have a cell signal. So we have to keep things like cell signals and microwave signals, garage door openers, Wi-Fi, anything like that that would interfere with the science of the telescope away from the observatory. So that's why we're sort of built in the mountains from large population centers so that we can be insulated from a lot of those man-made sources of interference. So that's a little bit of background about the observatory. Now to move into more about what I do there, we can flip to the next slide. So like most people, it's hard to say what a typical day is. So I've compiled a few things from across my week here. My day might start with a 9 a.m. meeting where I meet with people from around the observatory to decide on our priorities for the week. Now, in Green Bank, there aren't just astronomers working there. It really takes a village to run an observatory. So there are astronomers, engineers, maintenance staff. We have a full cafeteria on site. It's really was designed in the 50s to be everything someone would want in their new life in the mountains of West Virginia. So we have a rec facility on site, for instance. And so there are a lot of people that have to work together to fully make the observatory run. And so we have regular check-ins with all of the divisions to make that happen. One of the great things that I get to do is work with visiting observers from around the world. And so that might take a couple hours every day where I'm on the phone or emailing with people who are in Germany and want to use the telescope, or in Australia and want to use the telescope, because we are open for anyone around the world to use. It's really a merit-based system. People put in proposals and the best ideas are observed with the telescope. And so that's one of my jobs, is to make sure that they get the best science possible out of the observatory. We have regular talks where people come to site. Recently, that's been more virtual, and give talks about their work that they've used the telescope for. And then I have my own science program where I can sort of run free with my own data. And for me, that involves studying big stars and how they can impact the galaxy around them, anywhere from 10 to 100 times the mass of the sun. So I have this listed as a 9 to 5, and a lot of people at the observatory do put in those hours, but as you can imagine, we can be called away at any time, day or night, to do observations or to fix bugs on the telescope. And so, again, I'll reaffirm, there really is no typical day for me or for anyone at the observatory. It's all just working together to make sure we keep moving forward as an institution. Let's move on to the next slide. So what did I do to get to Green Bank? I've laid out from high school onward here, but I guess something you could have before high school is that it seems like every other year I was given a telescope for a birthday present. And some of my parties in the summer were comet watching parties, things like that. So in high school, I took a lot of science courses and did a lot of STEM related extracurriculars to really experiment with what kind of science I was interested in. I knew I had sort of an aptitude for STEM, but was I interested in physics or chemistry or something like that? After high school, I went to Westminster College in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, and I majored in physics with a math minor. I did some independent research with professors and then had an internship in the Army's night vision laboratory during college. And after college, I went straight to work on my PhD at West Virginia University, where I got my physics master's and PhD, and again did a lot of independent research with professors. It looks like that internship popped up in the wrong spot down there. But after I graduated with my PhD, going on 2.5 years ago now, I did a postdoc at the Green Bank Observatory. And what a postdoc is a temporary 2 to 3 year position that's usually meant to be a stepping stone between graduate school and a permanent academic position. And so I was in this postdoc where I did a lot of independent research and worked with visiting observers. And then a scientist position opened up. So I applied for that and was hired on full time at the observatory. Next slide, please. So what skills and experiences are valuable in this position? As a few other people have mentioned, it's not necessarily technical expertise. That's very important if you want to get into science, but there are a lot of other soft skills that come together that can make you successful in your position. So for me, it's really critical that I'm organized and I don't mix up different people's observations. Really, we want to keep all of our visiting scientists happy with the services we're providing them. A really important STEM tool that I have in my toolkit is that I know a few different computer languages. A lot of my scientific duties are coding. And so we do have a software division that works at the observatory, but essentially all of the scientists also spend parts of their days writing computer programs to tell the telescope what to do and to write programs to look through their data. Again, some basic physics and math skills that you might have touched on in high school or in some introductory courses always come back to haunt you, I think, through some of this work. And then strong communication skills. So I mentioned that the observatory really is a village where I have to be able to communicate scientific priorities to people who don't necessarily have a scientific background, and they know far more about the day-to-day maintenance of the facility than I do. So we have to find where our interests and needs meet and communicate those to each other. So as with any career, I think you can find the aspects of the job that you're good at and put in a lot of work to really exceed at those, and you'll stand out. So let's see, I think I have 1 or 2 more slides. Any career highlights? So here is a picture of me, not in Green Bank, but at the Very Large Array, which is in Socorro, New Mexico. It's our sister observatory. And throughout my work, I've gotten to travel lots to conferences and work with research collaborators across the world. Science is a global enterprise, and astronomers from all over the world work together. There aren't that many astronomers in the world. We don't really need all that many astronomers in the world. That is, we don't need as many astronomers as we need people who are really engineering roads and things like that. And so the expertise of astronomy is really spread out across the continents. So I have some really close collaborators that I work with weekly down in Australia. And so there's a lot of freedom to get to work on projects and with people that interest you in the field. So I think maybe there's one more. Okay, any setbacks that I've faced and inspiration to get into this job field? I think the main one that comes to mind is that graduate school can take a really, really long time to get your PhD. So you think if you're at the end of high school, you finish high school and then it's 4 years of undergraduate, but then after those 4 years of undergraduate, typically for a PhD, it's another 6 years. And so in total, you have about 10 years from graduating high school to going into the workforce as an astronomer or as a physicist. And that 6 years in graduate school is a lot of independent research, where it might just be you working with a small group of people or with your advisor on the same project for a few years on end. And so graduate school, in that sense, can be very isolating, and a lot of people will get disheartened because of that isolation. So you need to find ways to continue to make your graduate school life exciting. Another thing in graduate school that can be difficult for people is transitioning from taking classes to doing full-time research. Now, you think from the age of 5 onward, your educational career is set up through course-based experiences. So you have a math class, you have an English class, and you know what you have to do to get through those courses for the 9 weeks or for the semester. Whenever you're switching into doing research, it's an entirely different ballgame, and you're not going to get necessarily a syllabus that says 6 months, this is what you do to get an A in your research, right? It's a lot more independent, and you get to guide that research in whatever direction you want. So that can be really exciting, but it can also be a challenge. And so those are some quick setbacks or things that I think can be hard to get into the job field. I think that might be all that I was thinking about chatting with you about, but if you do have any questions, I would be very happy to talk through them.
Are there any questions in the chat for him? And if there's any questions, feel free to speak up with your microphone. All right, well, I'm guessing that means we don't have any, but thank you so much for talking. That was really interesting. I've been excited to learn more about the observatory and about your career too. That sounds really interesting to study stars.
Yeah, once we are through all this, everyone is very welcome to come and play around the site as much as you'd like. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much. Alrighty, so next we have Tiffany, who's a GIS specialist with the U.S. Forest Service.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I am Tiffany Verlander. I am a cartographic technician for the Forest Service. And sorry, I don't have a presentation prepared. I didn't get the memo. Otherwise, I could have, otherwise I could have some pretty cool visuals to show you, but I'll explain it best I can. So I'm technically a cartographic technician, but really it's basically a GIS specialist. And a lot of people wonder what GIS is, what it stands for. It stands for Geographic Information Systems. So basically I make maps. GIS a lot of times uses, it encompasses the software ArcMap. So you have to be really proficient with ArcMap. And so that's basically what I do. So like my day-to-day basis at work, I work with an interdisciplinary team, you know, biologists and, you know, everybody in the Forest Service, you know, timber, and I help them to their proposed actions. I basically help them to visualize it, put it on a map. Through that, we can calculate acreages, mileages, and that is used for their analysis and can be used in legal documents and things like that. And I create the maps for legal documents, for proposed actions, for, you know, project plans, forest treatments, things like that. So I basically just kind of help manage everybody's data, help them visualize it, help with the analysis. And I also do some IT, because everybody still kind of has to do their own GIS work, but they kind of do the start, and then I do the polishing. I finish it up in the end and make sure everything is good to go. So aside from that, yeah, it's really interesting. I got into it in kind of a weird way. I didn't go to college until I was about 24 because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I always liked art. I was always visually driven. I kind of took some classes in Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, but I didn't think graphic design would be the right thing for me. But one day I was watching, what was it? It was Our Planet or something like that. And I was thinking how much, darn, I love animals. And I was like, that's what I need to go to school for. I need to be like a biologist or zoologist or something like that. So at first, GIS wasn't even on my radar. I went and I got my my associate's degree in biology from Tulsa Community College in Oklahoma, and that was a really good experience. You know, I just thought, okay, I'll start with an associate's and see how I feel, and it was such a good experience. I got scholarships, you know, and became a part of, you know, like the science group there, and made a lot of friends and connections. And I decided, okay, well, I'm going to get my bachelor's now. So I went and I transferred to Northeastern State University in Oklahoma. That's also in Tulsa. And I got my bachelor's in biology with wildlife and fisheries emphasis. And I got my minor in geography because I've always kind of liked geography too. But towards the end of my bachelor's, I was talking to my friend who is a zoologist. And she said, you know, if you want to get into like the biology field or zoology or work, you know, for the Forest Service or something like that, she was saying, you know, you really need to learn GIS. And I was like, well, what's GIS? She was like, it's mapping, you know, everything you do, you're going to have spatial data and you're going to need to map it. And I was like, okay. So I was waiting after a class one day and I saw a pamphlet on the wall like a week later after she told me about it. And it was a GIS certification at the community college. So, and it was 5 classes. I'm like, I can do this. And it ended up being really difficult. We had to do 2 classes one semester, 2 classes the next semester, and then we had to do a practicum. So it still took a year and a half to do the 5 classes. But it was the best decision I ever made. I got my first job through networking through that class. And I worked at a place called Aerial Data Service in Tulsa. And we basically mapped out the world. We used certain software that constantly updates. It's something called Digital Globe. It constantly updates the latest satellite imagery. We contracted with the Department of Defense. And so, you know, kind of areas that are in conflict and things like that, we would monitor changes and map out changes and, you know, even just different ecosystems and ecosystem changes and things like that. So I was there for a little while, but then I ended up getting a internship offer at NASA. So I went to California for 3 months and I worked at NASA. I ended up helping to map the geomorphologic features of Saturn's moon Titan. So I did that over one summer and I loved it so much. The next summer I asked them, I'm like, if you guys are still working on this and you still need another intern, I would love to come back. And they were like, yeah. So I went back the next summer, and this was the summer of 2017, and I ended up getting extended through the rest of the year. So I stayed there until the beginning of 2018. And so that was like the coolest experience, was mapping a moon. And they ended up actually publishing it. If you Google, you know, Titan's geomorphologic map, it'll come up with a bunch of pretty colors. And I I pretty much mapped about 75% of it, and one of my colleagues mapped about the other 25%. So that was really cool. That was kind of like the highlight of my schooling and stuff. And then I transferred to OU because I just didn't really know what to do yet after finishing my internship there. Because to be an intern, you have to be a student, and I had graduated at that point. So I went to OU and I got most of my environmental science master's. I haven't quite finished it yet. I do plan on finishing it eventually, but yeah, I mean, in the end, I kept thinking I want to, work with animals and work with biology, but I kept going back to GIS. I ended up getting an internship with the Bureau of Land Management, and I worked with archaeologists delineating their archaeological surveys dating back, 20 plus years, and basically just kind of updated all of their old files to show spatial data in ArcMap, so that basically in the future, the people at that location, the archaeologists, they could pull up old files and see if they needed to reevaluate a site or if it's already been evaluated before without having to dig through a bunch of paperwork. But through networking and everything, I was able to apply for my position here in West Virginia at the Monongahela National Forest. And I'm stationed out of Marlinton, and our ranger is amazing. She knows that, I love field work and I love animals and I like to be outdoors. So she was like, when you're not doing GIS work, feel free to go out into the field and help out. And GIS work even involves some field work too. One thing I want to do is get a pilot license to fly a drone, because, you can fly a drone and you can use that and, put it into GIS and, make maps and things like that. So it's not all just sitting in front of a computer. There are field aspects to it. And even ArcMap has, an app called Collector, and you can go out, collect GPS points with that, bring it back, upload it straight to ArcGIS Online. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do. So it's been kind of a strange, weird way that I got here, but I wouldn't trade it. I really enjoy it. As far as like what skills or experiences are valuable, I would say probably organization, computer skills. I kind of know the lingo, but for GIS, it is so difficult to learn. The software is so finicky that it's really good to at least do like a certification or like some starter classes, and you can even find some free ones online. You can get a GIS job without having a degree. As long as you have the experience and you know what you're doing and you can show that, then there's a lot of opportunity in the GIS field, and there's always so much more room to grow. It's great working with other people in GIS, because, I might know a lot about one part of GIS, and then a colleague might know a lot, on another part of GIS. And then when you work together, you can make some really incredible things happen. So that's about it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Are there any questions in the chat?
I have a quick kind of personal question, but I do a good bit of work in GIS in my position currently, and I really like it. I've done a little research on like what certifications are available, and there's like, I think a few different ones. Do you have a bias as somebody who's a part of that field?
As far as online, I'm not really sure. I got my certification from an accredited college. Like I went and sat in a classroom and everything. Mm-hmm. But yeah, as far as online, I don't have a good recommendation. I would say, do what online classes you can that maybe show a certificate that you did finish the class. And at least if you get a GIS interview, you can at least show these certifications like, hey, I did these classes.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you, Tiffany. That was interesting. One of our other speakers is currently in Tulsa too, so that was nice to hear.
Oh yeah, I love it out there.
So yeah, thanks so much for speaking. That was very interesting and cool to hear a different take on how people with interest in animals can use STEM to do different types of careers. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
And so next we have, getting the slide to change. We have Thomas, who is a software engineer with Green Bank Observatory.
Hi, how y'all doing? Wonderful. I just want to point out too that I was scheduled for 2:34 and you all are nailing it. So congrats. So yeah, my name is Thomas Chamberlain. I'm a software engineer at the Green Bank Observatory, and I am one of the other people that Will was talking about. So right now we're actually in the kitchen of my house on site at the Green Bank Observatory. So I've lived on site here for about 6 years now, and in this house the whole time. It would have been built, I don't know, probably in the 70s or so to house the growing on-site population of the observatory back then. And now it's still where a good chunk of the observatory staff lives, simply because it can be a bit difficult to find rental housing in the immediate area, as I'm sure y'all are well aware. So at the observatory, as Will was saying, we study outer space using a giant telescope that we have creatively named the Green Bank Telescope, or GBT, which is how I'll be referring to it. So scientists use the GBT and the data it produces to better understand the universe. And some of these scientists, like Will, who spoke a few minutes ago, work at the observatory itself. Others work at other institutions or universities all around the world. So we work with people from all over. Most of them are not employees of the observatory. They simply use the instrument that we maintain and make available to them for the science that they want to do. So my role there is really not scientific at all. So as a software engineer, I build things that help scientists do their science. And it's a lot of fun. The things that I build aren't tangible things, and that's why I don't have any slides. I don't really have pictures of the software that I build. These are invisible, intangible things that I create, and it can be quite hard to explain that to people, but I'm going to give it a shot. So the existence of the things that I make, if you can call it making things, really, they're confined to computers, you know, so it's like in Tron, pretty much. The problems that I solve with the software are quite real, and that's the part that is so much fun, actually helping the astronomers do the things that they want to do with the telescope is made possible by 20 years plus worth of software that you know, I have contributed to in a small way in my 6 years here, but obviously most of that preceded my tenure. So what does all that mean in practice? So I'll try to give you some examples of stuff that I've done in my time here to give you a rough idea. Sometimes the GBT gets a new piece of equipment. It gets an upgrade. So one of the things that often gets upgraded, so new things that we install, is something called a receiver. And a receiver is pretty much like the sensor in your digital camera. So it's the thing that the light actually ends up bouncing into and that we make a picture of the light with. And just like you can get a new model of camera or phone that has a better sensor or a newer sensor, we can add new instrumentation to the telescope that is fancier and does more sciencey things in some specific way. And so one of the first projects that I did my first year here was writing software that allowed a new piece of hardware to talk to the rest of the telescope. So when we are taking data, it's a lot like taking a picture of the sky. But in order for that to work, you have to coordinate all of the parts of the telescope together so that all the data that they take is kind of grouped in a sensible way, and you can make a good picture out of it later. So I had to write some software to allow this new stuff to talk to the existing software. And that took almost a year. It's a long time. It's a lot of fun. And I haven't really touched it since, but it was a fun time. Not everything that I do is actually astronomy related at all. So that would be something on the telescope doing science things. But I've also worked on something called the reservation system for the site. So we do a lot of education and public outreach here. We have a great EPO staff. and they do things like, an activity called Radio Astronomer for a day, where we bring a group of people on site and allow them to use an educational telescope that we maintain here to do radio science, a lot like actual scientists did many decades ago with that same instrument. They'll do big bus tours. They'll do host Boy Scout troops, all sorts of things like that. And organizing all of that was quite difficult and was done in this kind of ad hoc email-based paradigm for a long time. And we wanted a better way to do it. So we wrote a website that allows our staff to coordinate these reservations amongst each other, and also allows the general public to sign up for these activities through the internet. And so that was completely different. That was, building a website rather than building software for the telescope. So completely different technology stack, completely different experience, completely different skill set. And, that was another year. I worked on a team of 3 people for that. And we still maintain that website. I actually have an intern working on new features for that right now. She'll be working for another 4 months here or remotely. Another example, and this is what I'm actually working on right now, is a data archiving system. So the telescope takes a lot of data, which you can think of as images, although it isn't quite that until someone puts a lot of work into it to create something visual out of it. And so we got like 20 years of data that's just, in storage. And we've published papers from it. Various people have done science with it. But there's always more that can be done with historical data. And we haven't done a great job of making all of that data available to people in the past. And so what I'm working on is a way of kind of cataloging all of the data that we do have, analyzing its quality, and trying to determine a good way for people to access that data, determine which types of observations we have done in the past. Have we looked at this star before? What images are available for that star? Things like that. So those are hopefully some concrete examples of what I actually do in my role here. Not everything is project-based. So just like the telescope itself, software requires maintenance. Software is a little strange because it doesn't wear out like a physical thing in the real world. It just exists the same as it ever was forever, which can be good and bad. The bad part is that the world obviously changes around you. So software is always getting older with respect to the outside world. So we update our operating systems. Think Windows Update or an update to your Mac operating system that breaks something. And some software engineer somewhere is going to have to fix the thing that broke or make sure that it will work with the new version of Windows or Mac or whatever. So we try to keep ahead of these updates so that our software will always continue to work into the indefinite future, but it's not free. It does require work, and that part is not any fun. Nobody likes doing that, but we have to do it anyway. And then sometimes, as Will mentioned, things break. Things go wrong during observations. So I am one of the people that get called, at least for certain specific things that are my fault. If the telescope won't do the things that we want it to do, that's very bad because we want it to be taking pictures constantly, 24/7, forever. And is the amount of downtime that we have, we try to keep that to a minimum. So there's some scheduled maintenance that has to happen to keep it physically in good condition. But ideally, all the software should work all the time. That's, of course, not true in the real world. And so one of the things that I try to do is respond to things that break as quickly as possible and get things working again. So the last couple minutes, I'll talk a little bit about how I got here. It's a pretty short path. It wasn't where I expected to go, but here I am. I don't have any formal training at all in astronomy. So unlike Will, I didn't spend a decade of my life on astronomy things. I have a degree in computer science from Georgia State University. It's a bachelor's degree, and it took me 5.5 years to get that. So, I was an okay student, and here I am anyway. So I found this job basically on a lark. I was just looking for jobs, and this one seemed interesting, and I applied, and I got it. And it's been kind of this amazing cascading thing since then. I never really expected to be living out here in West Virginia. I came here from Atlanta, Georgia. I didn't expect to be working in an observatory. I didn't really know what radio astronomy was. I knew about astronomy generally, but we do a very specific and confusing brand of it here where everything is kind of invisible. And yeah, so I really do love it here. I wouldn't have it any other way. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And yeah, so I don't know, hopefully that helps. I know the intangible nature of what I do can make it difficult to talk about or understand what I'm doing. It makes it seem probably a little complicated and scary, but it really isn't that much different than what anyone else does. I build things, I fix things, I solve problems. The things that I do are just a little bit harder to see. So that's what I got. If there's any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any questions in the chat for him?
So I see one from Ben. Do you have any advice for younger students who may want to get into coding and software? Yeah, so do as much of it as you can. It doesn't have to be professional. It doesn't have to do anything real, but there are a lot of great, like one of the ones that I got interested in recently is something called Advent of Code, which is an advent calendar of coding problems that someone puts together every year leading up to Christmas. It doesn't really have anything to do with Christmas except the theme, but it's basically a little coding puzzle, and you can solve it in whatever programming language you like. And it's a whole lot of fun if you enjoy solving puzzles. And it's the sort of thing that you probably should enjoy if you want to get into coding anyway. There's a lot of other similar things like that if you look around. But I think it's really important to make it interesting for yourself, to make problems that you're solving actually interesting and challenging, and to feel good about solving them, not just like, you know, taking courses for the sake of it or trying to get to some end goal, but trying to solve real world problems for yourself with software in challenging and fulfilling ways. That's where I would start. Will asks, what kind of software internships or other internships does the observatory have? So right now, I mentioned earlier that we are, I can speak at least for myself. So we have a software intern right now, Swathi Mukkamala, who is working on the reservation system. She was hired in conjunction with a program called New Force, which is a arm of Generation West Virginia. And it's basically a coding boot camp that's 6 months in length and does not discriminate based on background. There's people who have no coding experience at all that go into it. There's people who have a college degree in something else and go into it. But the goal of that is to basically get you up to speed on real world technologies in web development in 6 months and kind of pop you out with some concrete things that you have done to show potential employers. And I give talks and do some mentoring through that process. And then I interview folks at the end. And if we're able, we try to hire one for 3 to 6 month internship doing web development of some kind. I know that there's other internships that you can find information about on our website that I don't really know enough about to speak to.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for answering those questions and for giving a talk.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Alrighty. So next we have another speaker from Green Bank Observatory. It's Amber, who's a scientific data analyst.
All right. So like she said, I am a scientific data analyst at Green Bank. And I've actually, Thomas was one of the first people I met. Well, I guess I was there for like a month or two before Thomas got there. So Thomas and I have been there for about the same amount of time. But when I started at Green Bank, I actually started as a telescope operator and not as a data analyst or scientist. So can go to the next slide. So I did the day in the life of what I would do, which kind of like Will, this is just a general overview because it changes every day. You have to be very flexible, and there's a new issue every day that so this doesn't always hold fast. But I spend most of the morning checking my emails because usually I get about 30 emails overnight and checking to see if anything has exploded that I have to take care of first thing in the morning. And then I tend to read the operator logs just to keep myself up to date on what's going on with the telescope. And then at 11 a.m., I usually around that time, I'll start working on some observer support, which is actually the main part of my job. Then at lunch, I go to the science talks that that Will had mentioned. Sorry. And 1 p.m. I usually have some form of support meeting or training or documentation, I'm usually working on. From 2 to 4, it's more observer support usually, because as a data analyst, our main job is observer support, so we do more of that than like a staff scientist would have to do. And then from 4 to 5, I usually try to work on some of my own stuff, which I went to school for planetary science. So the big thing in radio astronomy for me is radar. And so I try to set aside that a little bit of time to actually work on that on my own at the end of the day. And then the last thing is being on call. As a data analyst, I'm on call like a week a month, which means that, as I think Will explained, you can be called at any time of the day to help with telescope problems or observer problems and things like that. And being that I have the background of being a telescope operator, which I'll explain a little more later, I get called more often because I can help the newer operators, or sometimes it's just they call me because they know I know both sides of it. I've done the operation side and I've done the science side. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, so I did my path to Green Bank, kind of copied Will on this again. So I started with where I went to high school. I went to high school at Conrad Weiser Area High School, which is in Robesonia, Pennsylvania. I took a lot of science courses as well and a lot of extracurricular activities. I did Science Olympiad, Quiz Bowl, JCL, which is technically Latin Club, but I did things not science related as well. I was in marching band and musicals and things like that because I enjoyed doing those, even if they weren't necessarily science related. I went to undergrad at a university called Alfred University, which is in upstate New York. It's a very tiny college that most people have never heard of. And I got my bachelor's degree in planetary geology there. So I only have a bachelor's degree. I don't have a master's or a PhD. So during that time, though, I was we had a private observatory there, which is one of the reasons I chose to go there. And I was a lab TA, and I was actually the open house supervisor for the observatory. And then during that time, I also did some internships, which were very helpful in helping me figure out what I wanted to do. So I did a summer internship at the Buell Planetarium, which is in the Carnegie Science Center in Pittsburgh. And I also worked with an organization called Citizens for Space Exploration, which is essentially you go to Washington, D.C., and you lobby your politicians and stuff to give more money to NASA. So that's how I determined I didn't like politics and I didn't want to do that. But when I started in undergrad, I actually started as a full physics major because astronomy is kind of like a minor-ish or like a field of concentration. And I learned pretty early on that I wasn't a numbers person. I didn't like sitting in the classroom or sitting and just staring at papers and like research. Like I wanted to do hands-on stuff, and I learned that pretty early on. So that's why I kind of started doing the planetarium stuff and being the TA and doing the because I figured I liked working with the telescopes more. I was a more hands-on person. So after that, when I graduated, I actually had a harder time finding a job right out of school that was astronomy related. So I actually did a whole bunch of odd jobs. I was a temp employee at a bunch of places for a while. However, I did for about 5 years have a job as a technician's assistant at a place called Axo Nobel, which has multiple branches. It's a global science company, but I did powder coatings, and I actually worked there for 5 years doing chemistry and stuff, creating powder coatings, which is a field most people have never heard of. But essentially, it's like paint. It's the paint you put on metals. So instead of just brushing it on, you actually apply a powder to it, and then it melts it and turns it into a more anti-corrosive surface and stuff like that. And then now I work at the Green Bank Observatory. And like I said, I started as a telescope operator, and now I'm a data analyst. Like I said, I found I really loved doing the hands-on stuff with the telescope. And so I will say hands down, being a telescope operator was like the best job I will ever have. The only thing I didn't like about that job was we worked shift hours. So I worked 12-hour shifts. So we did 2 day shifts and then 2 night shifts, and then you had a couple days off. But it was just hard to be, I was single, living alone, and it was hard to have a life when you were working 12-hour shifts that alternated all the time. So I mean, other than that, I mean, it was the coolest job I'll ever have. There was, I think later on I have a picture of I got to climb to the top of the telescope and actually touch. There's a light at the top that's very hard to see because to you it looks very small, but it's actually about the size of my upper body. And so I got to do that, which most people don't get to do. All right, go ahead to the next slide. So what skills and experience are valuable for my current position? So for my job as a data analyst, like I said, I do a lot of support. So having strong communication skills is good. But also my job kind of requires me to, like Thomas had said and Will had said, interact with other people in the departments who don't maybe have science background or have the telescope operations background. So having good interpersonal skills, I find also really helps because you can just, go down and, you're more comfortable talking to people when you know them. So, sometimes I'll just go down just to, see how people are doing, keeps you involved and keeps you, up to date on what's going on and it makes you more personable. Problem solving skills is a big one. A lot of times, like I said, I get called in the middle of the night to have to solve a problem. So you have to be able to be coherent enough to do that in the middle of the night, which once you realize what's going on, it's usually pretty easy to be awake. Learning computer languages is good. I wasn't as great at that. I didn't really know very many before I started this job. But it is a helpful thing to use. It wasn't entirely necessary, but it would definitely make my job easier if I had done more of them earlier on. And time flexibility is also a good thing to have because with this job, things when there's a problem, it just happens. You don't have time to just sit down and think about the problem. Some people are paying to use this time on the telescope. Some people only given a certain amount of time, so you don't want to spend too much time just like, well, let me get back to you on the problem. You have to fix that problem now. You can't really just you have to sit down and think about it, but a lot of times it's, a more like suddenly you have to do something and you have to be able to, you might be at home having dinner and get called and have to, do something. All right, go to the next slide. Thank you. I guess my picture that was there has disappeared.
Here we go.
Oh, there we go. I think it might have originally been like an animation or something, and I just. So my career highlights is obviously I have operated the largest fully steerable telescope in the world. There are some debate as to if there are some ships out there that technically count as the largest fully steerable objects. So I put telescopes specifically because there are bigger telescopes, but they can't move. And this can move all around and, up and down and all sorts of stuff. And one of the things that I think is a highlight is I didn't get a PhD, but I'm still able to do the science that I love. Like I've always loved astronomy ever since I was a kid. And I've loved the planets and stuff like that. And even though I didn't go through all the years that Will had to go through, I may not to the same degree be able to do certain things, but I can still do the science that I love. And I've met some of the most famous radio astronomers in the world, which I had a college professor who talked a lot about Frank Drake, who is part of SETI. And my college professor must have been obsessed with this person. And just like, so I heard about him for like 4 years straight. And then when I came to Green Bank, I found out that, he was a big part of Green Bank and he came to Green Bank and I got to meet him. And that was like a big deal for me because I, had only heard about this person in school and from my professor. And now here I am meeting him in person, which was really cool for me. Next slide, please. Setbacks I faced and inspiration in the job. Like I said earlier, I found it hard to get a job in astronomy right out of undergrad. I had to do a lot of temp jobs, a lot of odd jobs. I worked in a warehouse at one point, moving boxes back and forth, whatever I needed to do to get paid at the time. But I never gave up. I constantly was looking for jobs, even in astronomy, even if I had to do something else in the meantime. And I found that I really loved chemistry during that time I worked as a chemist, but astronomy was still what I really wanted to do. And even though I was good at that other job, I, kept looking for astronomy jobs until I finally got one. And one of the things I want to make sure I say this correctly, don't take experience for granted. And education isn't always everything. I'm not saying you shouldn't get a formal education or that you don't necessarily have to go to college, but a lot of the people I met, especially in my chemistry job, were the brightest minds in that field. Like they knew everything. You could ask them anything and they could answer anything about, like, they couldn't tell you what a benzene ring is necessarily, but they could answer any chemical compound question about something they'd worked with. But they were all experienced, and a lot of them didn't even have, they had a high school education and that was it. So college is not necessarily everything. I mean, there's fields there's things that will open up for you. But experience is also, I wasn't the greatest student in school. I had not so great grades, but I made up for that by having experience and going out into the field and, you know, maybe doing things that I didn't want to do right away necessarily to gain that experience. So I always want to make sure that I tell people, you know, don't take doing things, you know, for granted. Experience is just as valuable as an education as well. And I think that should be it. If you go to the next slide, I think it's just the ending slide. Ta-da! That's it for me.
Yes, thank you so much. Are there any questions in the chat for her?
You, Thomas, of course you're my favorite. Thomas has asked who's my favorite coworker, and of course it has to be Thomas, of course. I think he's my longest standing friend coworker. Everybody else has left us. Take that well. Uh-oh. Sorry. There's a cat, sorry. Any other questions from not my friends trying to cause problems between each other? All right.
Yes, well, thank you so much for talking. That was definitely interesting to learn about all the different aspects of running a telescope.
Yep, no problem. Thank you for having me.
And so that's all our speakers. Has Brianna joined us? Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, I'm here now.
Oh, yay, okay. So if you wanna go ahead and give your talk, I'll go back to your picture. Here we go.
Sure. Sorry I was a little late. I had a field meeting that went an hour longer than expected.
Well, I feel like that always happens with field meetings. You're totally good. I'm glad we could get you in here.
Yeah, glad I was able to make it. So I am actually a wildlife technician right now for the Marlinton district on the Monongahela National Forest. So I work with our district wildlife biologist. And here on the forest, our main job is implementing habitat restoration projects. And my role in that, along with the biologist, is to assess every project before we implement it to see how it's going to affect the wildlife present in that area of the forest. So we have a lot of different species that we're interested in. Of course, all of our threatened and endangered species. And then we also have different regional mammals and bats and birds and amphibians and everything you can imagine. It's a list of about 80 different species that we have to consider for every project that we do. And so while the wildlife biologist is the one writing up all the reports and working with Fish and Wildlife Service to get everything approved before we start a project, I'm usually the one out in the field collecting data and surveying to figure out what species are there. I've only been in this position for a couple of months now, so I haven't really gotten to do much of the field work yet, but I'm really looking forward to that once we get back into the spring. So a lot of what I've been doing so far is working on other aspects of projects, such as developing interpretive signs and managing current projects. So my day-to-day right now is pretty up in the air. Every day is a little bit different. It just depends on the needs. I imagine once we get into the field season, it's going to be a little more structured. As far as how I arrived at this position, I also didn't really have a very linear path for most of my life. I wanted to be a veterinarian. And so that's what I studied in university. I got my bachelor's in animal science, but at some point I did.
I think we're having a bit of connection issues.
Hear me now? I think I'm using data right now.
All right, yeah, I can hear you better
It's
now.
not the best. Okay. Sorry about that.
No,
So I got my degree in animal science, planning to become a veterinarian, but then decided through an internship opportunity working with big cats that I wanted to switch to conservation. So coming out of my bachelor's degree, it was a little bit of a struggle for me because my degree was sort of related, but not quite exactly fitting the types of jobs that I wanted. But I was able to actually get a temporary position with the Forest Service out in New Mexico that kind of got my foot in the door for working in forest management, specifically for wildlife. And at that point, I was more of the feet on the ground, implementing projects out on the forest, mowing down sagegrass so that we could replant it, versus the position I'm in now, where I'm more in the planning stages and surveying before we start implementing a project. And from there, I was able to move on to another position where I got to do more of like the survey field work with the National Ecological Observatory Network, which is a really great organization. I would totally recommend for anybody who is interested in field work. So in my position there, I worked with small mammals. So we did small mammal trapping. We also did some insect trapping for mosquitoes and ground beetles. And I learned a lot about surveying protocols in the field, in the office, and processing samples, and learned a lot there. And then from there, I actually took a bit of a curve and joined the Peace Corps, as you can see in my picture, and spent the last 3 years in Tanzania, which ended up opening the door to this position because through my Peace Corps service, I was able to get non-competitive eligibility, which just made it easier for government organizations like the Forest Service to hire me on through a less complicated process. So it made it a lot easier to get this position. I also learned a lot there. Working with the wild has been super helpful so far in this position as well. Experience has been super helpful for me, and definitely if you want to go into wildlife biology, I would totally recommend taking advantage of any opportunities you might find to learn more about GIS. But that being said, I don't have a formal education myself and have been able to learn on the job. So if you find the right opportunity, you can absolutely learn it as you go, learn from your peers. With this position with the Forest Service, I've had a lot of opportunities to take courses through an Esri account.
Sorry, it's breaking up really bad.
Maybe I should just end it there unless anybody has any questions. I'm not sure what the connection issue is here.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
It's like slow motion talking, but yeah, if anyone has any questions, ask. Because yeah, I'm interested in hearing about this too, because that's what I want to do too. So
oh yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take questions. We'll see if maybe my connection will cooperate more.
Is your current position permanent? Here, I'm going to try turning off my camera to see if that
Do a
helps.
lot of temporary.
Let me turn off my camera. Maybe that'll help a little bit. So yeah, I was going to ask, is your position permanent currently?
Yes, my current position is a permanent full-time position. I've had temporary positions in the past, but this is my first permanent one, which is an exciting step forward.
Yes, that's awesome. And then I guess I had one other question about your non-competitive status. Like how soon after you got that did you start applying for Forest Service positions?
So I finished my service with the Peace Corps in March. I was actually evacuated due to COVID. So as soon as I got back, I started applying for positions. And it was a little different because I was with Peace Corps. So Peace Corps has their own like job site where organizations, particularly government organizations who want to speed up the hiring process, can post their positions on the Peace Corps' website. And then you can apply through there instead of having to go through USA jobs, which is where all federal. So I was able to, within a couple of months, it still took a little while for the hiring process, but instead of taking like 6 months, it took 2 or 3 months instead. But it probably took me about 2 months after I got back to start getting some hits. And then this position I was offered about 3 or 4 months after I started looking.
Awesome. Yeah, I was also evacuated due to COVID. I was in Madagascar doing a little internship. I also had to leave suddenly, so yeah.
Yeah, that is cool to know. It's definitely a unique experience.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any questions from the guests?
Yes, I have a question. Could you talk about how you went about joining the Peace Corps and your time there, and like how you apply and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. So joining the Peace Corps now is a little bit different than it was in the past. So the Peace Corps works in 70 plus countries across the world. And the application process is very similar to applying to any other job. You go through the Peace Corps website, you fill out your application, and you are able to choose which sector you want to work in and which country you want to work in, and you can be as specific or as general as you want. So you can just apply to go anywhere, do anything, and they will decide where you fit best. I talked to a recruiter before I applied to try and figure out what sector I wanted to work in and where I wanted to go. And I worked in the agriculture sector in Tanzania. And in Tanzania, we had the agriculture health, and the application process is a rather long process. It takes about 6 months to a year from when you apply to when you actually leave. And it involves, you do the online application, you have to have recommendations, letters of recommendation. You go through an interview process that has a rather extensive list of questions, and then you have to go through medical approval. It's a process, but it's definitely worth it in the end. and they do what they can to help you out there, and they've definitely simplified it over the years. It might be a little bit different right now because they're just now starting to reopen after COVID. They closed every program worldwide because of COVID-19. So things are a little different right now, but definitely something to keep in mind for the future as they start reopening. And a little bit about my service. I served as an agriculture volunteer. So I was living in a rural village doing community agriculture projects, just working with the community that I was living in to figure out what they needed. And I, not being an expert on all things agriculture, served as more of a connection to resources. So a connection to Peace Corps' resources and other resources in nearby villages and other communities to help them get different projects off the ground. So I worked on a chicken husbandry project, and I did some post-harvest management and a little bit of HIV/AIDS education. And with Peace Corps service, it's pretty much, it is what you make it. You can go in whatever direction is best for you and your community. It's pretty much an open book. And then I actually extended my service for a third year in order to work with a wildlife conservation NGO in Tanzania. So I was able to get more relevant experience to my current position and my career goals, working on sort of like the data management side of big cat conservation.
Awesome. Yeah, one thing I will add is that Peace Corps and AmeriCorps are both great ways to get your foot in the door with working with the government. Once you work with those organizations, you're much more likely to get a job in the national government because of your status. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in and giving a talk. I was looking forward to your section, and maybe I'll get to see you sometime soon out in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or want to work together on something. I'm here.
Sounds great. And yeah, any other attendees, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. We still have some of our speakers in on the chat and from different backgrounds. So if anyone has any other questions, I also would be happy to forward your questions to any of the speakers. I'll go ahead and add my email in the chat. So if you want, you can send me an email and I will be happy to forward your questions to any speakers that we had today. Or even if you have any questions about AmeriCorps, about wildlife, career paths, or anything like that, we'd be happy to answer those. We also have other AmeriCorps in that work with the fish hatchery, the observatory, and other forest districts. So we would love to give any advice. And yeah, thank you all so much. I'm happy that we ended up having some people come, and I learned a lot, and I hope you all did as well. And I hope everyone's doing okay and has a great Friday and a great weekend. And if there aren't any other questions, I'll go ahead and end the recording. Right, yes, so I'm